For our first text this morning, I want to read what is commonly known as the parable of the sheep and the goats. And you may be familiar with it. It's found in Matthew chapter 25. And in it, Christ is describing what the scene is going to look like when he returns someday. And likewise, some questions that will be asked of us by him as well. Some very interesting questions that we don't hear preachers mention very often. But since Jesus said that he was going to do it, I think that it is certainly worth taking a look into. So if you would like to follow along, I'm going to be starting in the 31st verse, and I'm going to read until verse 46. And again, that's in the 25th chapter of Matthew's Gospel. And this is what Jesus had to say there. He said, "When the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the holy angels with him, then he will sit on the throne of his glory. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate them one from another, as a shepherd divides his sheep from the goats. And he will set the sheep on his right hand, but the goats on the left. And then the king will say to those on his right hand, 'Come, you blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you took me in. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me.' And then the righteous will answer him, saying, 'Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you drink? When did we see you a stranger and take you in, or naked and clothe you? Or when did we see you sick or in prison and come to you?' And the king will answer and say to them, 'Assuredly I say to you, inasmuch as you did it to one of the least of these my brethren, you did it to me.' Then he will also say to those on the left hand, 'Depart from me, you cursed, into the everlasting fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me no food. I was thirsty, and you gave me no drink. I was a stranger, and you did not take me in, naked, and you did not clothe me, sick and in prison, and you did not visit me.' Then they also will answer him, saying, 'Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or naked or sick or in prison and did not minister to you?' And then he will answer them, saying, 'Assuredly I say to you, inasmuch as you did not do it to one of the least of these, you did not do it to me. And these will go away into everlasting punishment, but the righteous into eternal life.'" Now, I've got a second text this morning that I'd like to go ahead and get to and read, and this account is found in the 8th chapter of the book of John. And in this passage, Jesus is about to be tested by the scribes and the Pharisees who don't like him. They're always looking for something to get against him. And so they've brought to him a woman that has been caught in the act of adultery. And the law of Moses said that the punishment for this behavior was for this woman to be stoned to death. And so they've brought her, and they're putting this situation in front of Christ on purpose. The main reason being so that no matter how he responds, they can try to find something to use against him. And I want us to understand that that is the real motivation for what they're up to on this day. But I want to also see how Jesus handles the situation, and likewise how he takes the opportunity to turn the tables and to teach the Pharisees something about themselves. So it's John chapter 8, and I'm going to read verses 2 through 12. It says, "Now early in the morning he came again into the temple, and all the people came to him, and he sat down and taught them. And then the scribes and Pharisees brought to him a woman caught in adultery. And when they had set her in the midst, they said to him, 'Teacher, this woman was caught in adultery in the very act. Now Moses in the law commanded us that such should be stoned. But what do you say?' This they said, testing him, that they might have something of which to accuse him. But Jesus stooped down and wrote on the ground with his finger, as though he did not hear. So when they continued asking him, he raised himself up and said to them, 'He who is without sin among you, let him throw a stone at her first.' And again he stooped down and wrote on the ground. Then those who heard it, being convicted by their conscience, went out one by one, beginning with the oldest even to the last. And Jesus was left alone, and the woman standing in the midst. And when Jesus had raised himself up and saw no one but the woman, he said to her, 'Woman, where are those accusers of yours? Has no one condemned you?" She said, "No one, Lord." And Jesus said to her, "Neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more." And then Jesus spoke to them again, saying, "I am the light of the world. He who follows me shall not walk in darkness, but have the light of life." You know, back when we just had one child, Abigail, and she was only about a year old, something happened, or a bunch of things happened actually, where our whole world was turned upside down in what seemed like one of those overnight types of things where you just wake up and everything changes. And it took a little bit more time than that, but it just all happened so fast. But, you know, before I get to those things, at first, I want to say that our life was actually seeming to be going in a pretty good direction right before this. I had a decent job. We had just moved into a house that we had bought. I had just started Bible college, I believe. Had leased our old house out to tenants. And then Shelley found out that she was expecting our second, Josiah. Everything was going great. But then in a period of what was probably only a few weeks, if even that, the tenants that we had found did over $30,000 worth of damage to our house, leaving it uninhabitable when we got it back. I didn't have the money to fix it up, couldn't rent it out anymore. And then after that, I went into a work one day and found out that they were doing mass layoffs. And I was one of them. So our good life changed really fast. You know, we had a young child, we had a baby on the way, 2 mortgages, one on an uninhabitable house, and no income. Not a fun place to be, just so you know. Now, for a short time, I was, trying to figure out what to do because I didn't know what was going to happen, and I was worried we were going to lose one or both of these houses, have foreclosures on our record. I was worried about feeding my family, all these different things. The job market in Central Ohio, where we were living at the time, was not very good. In fact, it was pretty bad. There weren't very many jobs, hence the layoff in the first place. So all that I could find at the time was a job working at a local gas station in a somewhat rougher part of town, and I did this for about 3 months there until I was able to find another job. And when I say somewhat rougher part of town, I mean it. You know, there were some evenings where it was downright scary working in this place. You never knew who was going to walk into the store, and the place had a history of being robbed quite often. And one time in particular, something happened to me that I want to share with you today that I will probably never forget. You see, I was alone working that night, and the door opened. And in walked this man who had long, stringy hair. I think he was wearing a trench coat. He'd clearly not bathed in a while. He had this expressionless look on his face. I mean, no smile, no frown, just a blank stare, like the lights were on, but nobody was home. And he walked only about 2 steps in through the door, and then he turned and he made eye contact with me behind the counter, and he stopped moving. And I mean, stopped moving. The guy literally did nothing. He didn't say anything. He didn't move his head. He just stood there staring into my eyes with his hands inside of the pockets of his jacket for what seemed like an eternity, and it had to be actually a couple of minutes. But I thought for sure that he was about to pull out a gun and rob me. But he didn't move. That almost made it worse because he didn't move, didn't say anything. So after a very long, awkward pause, I decided to say something to him and ask him how I could help him. No response. No change in his face. No acknowledging that he even heard me. And then after another few moments, he finally started walking, and he walked up to the counter, only about 3 feet away from where I was standing. Still said nothing, but his eyes were locked onto mine. At this point, I was positive that he was probably going to rob the store, but I didn't really know what to do, so we both just kind of stood there, kind of in this stare down. And he continued looking into my eyes for probably, I kid you not, 1 to 2 more minutes. That's how awkward and weird this was, until he finally opened his mouth and said something. And he asked to buy a pack of cigarettes. And when I smelled his breath and listened to how slow and slurred his words were, I finally began to realize that not only had he been drinking, but that he was on some sort of drug as well, which explained the very odd behavior that was going on. Now, after buying his cigarettes, he stood there awkwardly for what seemed like another eternity, just staring at me. And then he finally turned and slowly walked back out of the door. And I'll tell you something. I was never more relieved than in that moment right there. I mean, the guy scared me. I didn't get a good feeling from him. I felt like he was capable of doing something bad, and to be quite honest, I didn't ever want to see this guy again. That's how unnerved I was, how awkward the situation was. But sometimes God doesn't let it work out the way that we plan. In fact, sometimes He uses uncomfortable situations to teach us a lesson. And that's what He did for me. Fast forward into the future a bit, probably 6 or 7 months later. At this point, I had found another job. I think Josiah had finally been born. We had figured out our housing situation somewhat. Life was beginning to get back on track, a little less stressful for us. And one day, Shelley and the kids and I were out grocery shopping. And when we came back out to the parking lot that afternoon, when we were finished, who do I see standing there with a cardboard sign at one of the entrances asking for help but that man that had terrified me that night in the gas station? Well, my first human thought was that I again wanted nothing to do with him. I guess you could say that I had so much fun with the first encounter that I wasn't looking forward to a second one. The truth was, I just didn't have any compassion for him. He had gotten himself into this mess via the lifestyle choices that he had made, and now here he was, reaping the punishment for his behavior. And so I got into the car to leave him behind in my rearview mirror. But you know something? That was when the Holy Spirit spoke to me. Now, He didn't tell me to go give that man money like he was asking for, because he probably would have just taken it and spent it on the drugs and alcohol that would give him a temporary euphoria, even as they were also destroying his life. But He did tell me to go buy him some groceries and then to offer to pray for him. And so after arguing with God about this in my head for a minute, I finally caved and I went back into the store, bought a couple of bags worth of things, and then I came outside, walked over to this man, not knowing what to expect this time, not knowing if he'd be coherent. Now, I'm pretty sure that he was wearing the exact same clothing that he had had on the night in the gas station months earlier, and the smell verified it. But he was at least sober enough at this point in time to speak to me and to hold an actual conversation. And he was reserved, but he was cordial. So I handed him these bags, and he thanked me for them. In fact, he was very appreciative for it, very different from our first meeting. And then I asked him if I could pray for him. And you know, he seemed even more eager for this. In fact, as he said yes, he bowed his head, closed his eyes, and held out his two grimy hands for me to grab and to hold. And all I could think about in that moment was, I hope Shelley has some hand sanitizer in the car. You see, I didn't want to touch him. I was still repulsed by him. But so as not to be rude, I took his hands and I prayed for him for a minute or two. But then as I came to a close, the Lord told me to do something else, to take it a step further and to hug him. Now, to be honest, this was probably the hardest thing that He instructed me to do in that situation yet. I mean, I felt like I needed a bath just from holding his hands. The guy he smelled terrible in that moment, but God said, give him a hug. So I did. And I'll never forget what happened next, something that I did not expect. As I put my arms around this man, this dirty man that was given to drugs and alcohol, this man that I at one time thought was going to pull a gun on me, he melted. In fact, his whole weight fell on me as his arms tightened around my back. I was literally holding him up, and he began to weep and to sob. You see, he was at a crisis moment, and he needed to feel God's love for him that day, God's grace that extends farther than our flaws. His life was a mess, and he knew it. But in that moment, even though everyone else in his life had written him off as not worth the effort, he realized that God still cared. And that's powerful. And I'll tell you something, church. Even if it wasn't for that man's sake that the Lord had me do all of those things that day, it was at the very least for mine. Because I learned something about just how powerful the grace of God truly is, how far it's willing to go, and likewise what that means for us as His servants and what He's asking of us in order to show His grace. In fact, that is what was happening in John chapter 8, although I know it seems like an unrelated passage when we compare these two. But follow me here for a minute, because let's just get this out in the open first. That woman got herself into that mess that day. I mean, we can blame the scribes and the Pharisees, and they were certainly using her to get to Jesus. They were not doing this for any holy reasons whatsoever. But when they brought her to Christ, they said to Him that this woman was caught in adultery in the very act. And those Greek words for in the very act translate to in the theft itself, which was the ancient way of saying caught red-handed. No doubt of her guilt. She was in the situation when they found her. You see, they didn't grab some innocent woman and then make up lies about her character in order to get her stoned and to get to Jesus. This lady was pulled out from a bed with a man who was not her husband, unquestioned guilt. But here's the interesting part about this story. The part where Christ was trying to get these men to see the uncomfortable truth about not her, but about themselves. You see, Jesus never defended this woman's honor. He never said, she didn't do this, you men are lying about her, you're making up stories about her character. He knew that she was guilty, which is why at the end of the passage, He warns her by saying, go and sin no more. I mean, He wouldn't have said that had He thought that she was clean, but He clearly told her to stop what she was doing. And He showed her an extreme amount of grace by not condemning her to death that day, because being the only pure one there, Jesus certainly could have done just that. But what He also did was that He took a lot of hypocrites and He confronted them with their own sin, just as they were confronting this woman with hers. Because in their haste for her to receive her deserved punishment, the problem was that they forgot that they deserved something as well. You see, as they threw this woman with an obvious blot on her record at His feet, believing that she was not worthy of grace, they themselves were concealing all of their own flaws, all of the laws of Moses that they had broken over the years, which meant that they too had a well-deserved punishment coming. They also were not worthy of grace. So Christ looks at them and He says, okay, go ahead, you do it, stone her. But here's the catch. Let the one without sin among you be the first to cast a rock at her. So which one of you is so perfect in the law of God, so holy and innocent, because you are going to be the one that's going to execute her? You're the only one who can. And so the men began to think to themselves, wait a minute. If we require condemnation against this woman, if we pick up a stone to throw at her because of her sin, then we really must follow through with what we deserve for our indiscretions as well. And so they began to remember their own sins, the times that they had broken this command or that one. And knowing that they were all likewise guilty, and being convicted by their consciences, they left one by one, starting with the oldest, the Bible says. Now, how does this tie into the parable of the sheep and the goats, you may ask? Well, like I said, it's all one and the same. You see, we've got this mindset that seems to come naturally to us as humans that says that we should only help people or show them grace to the ones that either A, deserve it, or B, who can eventually pay us back. So either way, it's kind of a what do I get out of this type of way of thought. And further, if someone is in bad shape, they've done it to themselves, they deserve their problem, so it would actually be irresponsible for us to help them. That's often our mindset. But Jesus turned all of this on its head, and He taught something radically different to the people. In fact, in one passage, He blew all of these excuses out of the water for whether or not to help somebody or to show them grace when He said in Luke chapter 6, verses 32 through 36, but if you love those who love you, or if it is because you are going to get something out of it and you've already got these feelings, what credit is that to you? For even sinners love those who love them. Or in other words, you're doing nothing different from the rest of the world. Then he said, and if you do good to those who do good to you, what credit is that to you? For even sinners do the same. And if you lend to those from whom you hope to receive back, what credit is that to you? For even sinners lend to sinners to receive as much back. And then he followed it up by saying, but love your enemies, do good and lend, hoping for nothing in return, and your reward will be great, and you will be sons of the Most High, for he is kind to the unthankful and the evil. Therefore be merciful, just as your Father also is merciful. You see, Christ brought up enemies specifically to show us that our own mercy should be for all as well. Not just for those who we personally love, not just when we're going to get something in return. And it's not dependent on our feelings about somebody at all, actually. When I saw that man that day years ago, I didn't want to help him. And I didn't want to help him because all of the usual justifications for not wanting to help him were there in my head. He was not responsible. He would misuse the gift. He didn't deserve help because he had gotten himself into this mess. He scared me, so I didn't ever want to go near him again. And the list could go on and on with all the reasons why I should have just kept right on driving home with him disappearing from my rearview mirror forever. But there was one reason to help him that I had not been thinking of. One very important reason. One that superseded all of the excuses as to why I shouldn't do anything. And that reason was this. When it comes to God's grace, I don't deserve it either. You see, we both had broken God's laws, albeit in different ways, but that doesn't matter, because if you've broken one law, you're guilty of breaking them all, the Bible says. You see, when I survey my own life before Christ, I was certainly not responsible. And before finding Jesus, I misused the gifts that he sent many times, probably most every time. In fact, there were messes that I got myself into that were clearly my fault, problems that I created where I was the sole reason, and there was nothing that I could do on my own to get myself out of those situations, and I didn't deserve help. But God sent someone anyway. And the list could go on and on and on for me also, with all of the reasons why I should have just faded away in God's rearview mirror forever. But I didn't, because his grace is that powerful that it sought me out continually until I finally came to my senses. And even today, I'm still a work in progress, a man that needs grace just like all of the rest of us who need grace, just like those men who brought that woman to Jesus that day needed grace. But the problem for them as they looked at that woman, just like the problem for me when I was confronted with that man, was that we forgot all about our own second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth chances, and the list goes on. We forgot that we too had broken God's law and did not deserve that grace. And so in our own perceived perfection, we were unwilling to show the same mercy given to us to somebody else. We were ultimately playing God by deciding who's worthy and who's not. Granted, not doing a very good job of playing God either, considering that Christ said that the Father is kind to the unthankful and the evil. And then he said, therefore, you be merciful just as your Father is also merciful. But we looked at the dark blots on those before us while forgetting our own stains and our own stench before God, and yet still decided that mercy didn't belong to this one or that one, just for me. But you see, what we need to understand is that in this parable, Jesus takes this personal. In verse 41 it says, then he will also say to those on the left hand, depart from me, you cursed, into the everlasting fire, prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me no food. I was thirsty, and you gave me no drink. I was a stranger, and you did not take me in. Naked, and you did not clothe me. Sick and in prison, and you did not visit me. Then they also will answer him, saying, Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or naked or sick or in prison and did not minister to you? And then he will answer them, saying, assuredly, I say to you, inasmuch as you did not do it to one of the least of these, you did not do it to me. And you notice he said, least of these, not the greatest of these, not the ones that we think are worthy and who we would have done it for anyway, but the least of these. You see, God sees our pain. He understands our discomfort. In fact, years ago, I remember seeing a cartoon once online, and in the cartoon, one guy says to another, very cocky, "When I die, I can't wait to get there so I can ask God why He didn't do anything about hunger and poverty and all the problems like that are facing mankind." And the other fellow thought about it for a minute, and then he replied back and said, "I'm more afraid that when I die, He's going to ask me the same question." And the second fellow was right, because that's exactly what Jesus said that He's going to ask. Now, all this doesn't mean that we don't use wisdom. And when I say wisdom, I certainly don't mean human wisdom, because human wisdom is always going to lead us astray. But the wisdom that comes from above, which is the Holy Spirit that lives inside of the believer. Like in my situation, God didn't tell me to give that man cash. Cash was not what he needed at that moment. In that moment, he needed to feel God's love. So God told me to give him something to eat and to pray for him and to hug him. Still all things I didn't want to do. But because of my obedience, albeit reluctant obedience, that man felt the love of God that day. So it's important that we follow the guidance and direction of the Spirit of God that lives inside of us in all these situations. And you know what? There will be times when we actually can't offer much at all, physically speaking, because of our own situation. And that's okay. But spiritually speaking, there's always something that we can offer. Even if it's just a prayer and a hug, an ear to listen, or a shoulder to cry on. There will always be a way to show God's love and His mercy, and that is the point. And further, you know what? If we do something more than that, if they misuse the gift, if they don't appreciate the labor, they don't appreciate the concern and the mercy, as long as you felt the Spirit's guiding, don't get mad or feel bitter about it or allow it to keep you from doing whatever else God asks of you to do for the least of these. Because it's important to remember that although we might not have been the one to lead somebody to Christ, we still quite possibly could have been the one to plant the seed that somebody else is going to come and water. And as long as we've done our part, whatever God has asked us to do, the rest is all up to Him and them. And that takes all of the pressure off of us right there. As Paul said in 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verses 6 through 8, he said, "I planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the increase. So then neither he who plants is anything, nor he who waters, but God who gives the increase. Now he who plants and he who waters are one, and each one will receive his own reward according to his own labor." You know, there's probably a lot more that could be said about this parable, but I'm going to close with this. It's actually a very simple thing that Christ is telling us to do, a very clear directive, yet a simple thing that we still often need a daily reminder of. Because it truly is one of the clear messages that is found from God, from the Old Testament all the way to Judgment Day that Jesus is describing in this parable. Now, we don't always like to hear it, but Jesus shows us that this is what it's about. In fact, in His Sermon on the Mount, Jesus said this. He said, "Therefore, whatever you want men to do to you, do also to them. For this is the law and the prophets." The golden rule. And I myself am glad that God sent people to observe that rule, to show mercy on me when, I was one of the least of these, and I certainly had not earned it. Yeah, there was people ready to stone me, so to speak, just like they did for that woman that day in John chapter 8. But those aren't the ones that I remember. They didn't make the biggest impact. It was the ones who never gave up. The ones who showed mercy when most others wouldn't. So the very minimum that I can do in return is to show the same grace to others now as well, and to pray that they will feel like I did, that God still cares even when the world doesn't seem to anymore, and that He is fighting for their soul just as passionately as He fought for mine, because that is truly what it's all about. If you would bow your heads.